At 58 years old, Consuelo Medina inherited a burned-down hacienda, a name full of debts, and a horse nobody else wanted. Her sons told her to sign the papers and forget about that place. The notary in Zapotlan told her it wasn't worth the trip, and yet something in her, something she didn't yet know how to name, refused to obey. Welcome. If this story touches your heart, subscribe to the channel and comment from what part of Mexico or where you're watching us from. Her hair was already more white than black, her hands weathered from years of sewing, and she carried in her chest the silent weight of widows who had learned not to ask for help. Ramon, her husband, had died 3 years before, and before dying, he had told her something she kept the way one keeps things that aren't immediately understood. Consuelo, there's something of yours in Jalisco. Don't let it go. She didn't understand him then. She would understand much later. Her sons, Gerardo and Anibal, arrived at Don Ramon's wake with their wives and their city ways, and from the very first day they began talking about the hacienda. They had inherited it from a distant uncle of Ramon's, a man named Serafin Puga, who had died childless and left the property in a will that no one had taken seriously, because the place had been abandoned for over a decade. A shell of blackened walls in the middle of the plains, said Gerardo, as if that settled the matter. Mom, sign the power of attorney and be done with it. Don Seferino can buy it as is. It'll give us something. Don Seferino was a merchant from Guadalajara who had spent years buying ruined lands at pitiful prices and reselling them with profits he never shared with anyone. Consuelo knew him by name. She also knew the way her son looked at the commission they promised him if he managed to convince her. The night Gerardo set the papers on the dining room table, Consuelo looked at them for a moment and pushed them aside, without signing. First, I'm going to see what I inherited, she said quietly. Her daughter-in-law, Rebecca, let out a laugh that held no joy. Mom, you're already 58 years old. What are you going to do with a burned-down hacienda? Consuelo didn't answer. She served the coffee and changed the subject. 2 weeks later, she took a bus to Zapotlan El Grande with a small suitcase, the patched blanket Ramon had given her when they got married. Already faded, already frayed at the edges but still warm, and the address written by hand on a folded piece of paper. The trip took almost 5 hours. When she got off the bus, the Jalisco sun fell vertically over the dust of the road, and the air smelled of mesquite and earth that hadn't seen rain in weeks. The taxi driver who took her to the property said nothing at first. Then, when he saw the blackened walls from the road, he commented quietly, "That burned about 12 years ago. A fire in the stable. They say old Serafin never wanted to rebuild." Consuelo nodded and paid without haggling. The hacienda was exactly what they had told her, and also something no one had told her about. The stone walls were still standing, thick, firm, dark, as if the fire had purified them instead of destroying them. The roof had fallen on the western wing, but the main corridor was intact. The wooden beams, blackened but solid, the well in the center of the courtyard covered in moss, but with water, and at the back of the corral, standing alone against the adobe wall, there was a horse. It was an old animal with a coat that had once been gleaming black and was now dull gray, thin, with swollen hocks and a rope knotted around its neck that led nowhere. It looked at her without moving, with that patience animals have when they've been waiting a long time without knowing what they're waiting for. "Whose is it?" Consuelo asked no one in particular. A voice came from the other side of the gate. He belonged to Serafin. His name is Lucero. The man who had spoken was older than her, perhaps 10 years more. Slim, with a worn hat and hands that looked as if they were made of wood. His name was Abundio Fuentes, and he had been a farmhand at the hacienda before the fire. He lived in a small hut on the other side of the boundary, on a small plot facing the ravine. He said all of that without being asked, as if he had been rehearsing the explanation for some time. Nobody wanted to take him when the patron died, he added, looking at the horse. I brought him water and some fodder, but I'm too old for more now. Consuelo entered the corral, slowly, without sudden movements. Lucero watched her come and didn't move away. When she placed her hand on the animal's neck, he lowered his head just slightly, as if that gesture cost him something but was worth it. I'm not young either, said Consuelo. Abundio didn't smile, but something in his face settled into place. That night, Consuelo slept on the corridor, on the patched blanket spread out over a straw mat she found folded in a corner. There was no bed, there was no stove, there was a stone hearth that still worked, firewood stacked against the wall as if someone had left it there knowing someone else would come to use it, and a clay jug in which she boiled water for coffee. At dawn, Lucero was standing in the same spot in the corral, looking toward the east. Consuelo got up before the sun rose, lit the fire, warmed the coffee, and went out to the corridor with the jug in her hands. The Jahilsko plain was still. The air smelled of damp earth, though there had been no rain. The doves on the roof began to move slowly. Lucero snorted once. "Good morning," said Consuelo. That was the first morning. Others came. Abundio would appear every third day with something, once with chicken eggs, another time with a piece of goat cheese wrapped in a corn husk, another with a wooden chair he had to spare. He asked for nothing in return. He would sit on the corridor for a moment, drink the coffee Consuelo offered him, observe the state of the walls or the behavior of the sky, and then leave without hurry. With him, others began to come. Signora Trini from the house at the end of the dirt road, who brought an old broom and stayed 2 hours sweeping the courtyard without anyone asking her to. Trini's son, a quiet young man who repaired the well's curb in one afternoon. A man named Herminio who arrived with his mule and offered to clear the burned wing of debris at a price so low that Consuelo took a while to understand it was a favor in disguise. Lucero gradually improved. Consuelo got him better fodder with what she earned from the sewing she still did at night by candlelight. She would talk to him while brushing him. She told him things she wouldn't have told any person. That she missed Ramon every morning, that her sons looked at her as if she were a problem to be solved, that sometimes she didn't know if she had done right in coming. Lucero listened with his ears forward and his eyes still, and that was enough. In the afternoons, Consuelo explored the hacienda. There was a room at the end of the corridor that had been the foreman's office. The door was jammed shut by a fallen beam, and when Herminio cleared it one morning, they found inside a dark wooden desk, a broken chair, and a small wooden box with brass fittings that someone had stuffed between the wall and the furniture, as if they had hidden it in a hurry. Consuelo took it out and opened it. Inside were folded letters, some yellowed photographs, and beneath everything a thin folder tied with cord. She left it there for the moment. Something told her to wait, that this required another kind of attention. Meanwhile, her sons called. Gerardo with impatience, Aníbal with phrases that tried to sound reasonable, but at heart said the same thing. Sign, sell, come back to the city. Don Ceferino had raised his offer. They wanted an answer before the month was out. Not yet, said Consuelo each time, and hung up. The night she decided to open the folder from the little box, Lucero was restless in the corral. It was snorting and walking back and forth, which she rarely did. Consuelo went out to the corridor with a candle and looked at him for a moment. There, she told him. The horse stopped and looked at her. Then she went back inside and opened the folder. In the folder was a folded paper that was going to change everything. It was a notarized deed, dated 32 years earlier, with the seal of the public registry of the municipality of Zapotlan, and in it the name of Serafin Puga appeared as the holder of a water right, a natural spring in the ravine at the back of the boundary. That had gone for decades without appearing in any sale because no one had known it existed. Abundio, when Consuelo showed him the paper the next day, stayed silent for a long moment. The water source, he finally said. It was always there. Serafin registered it before the agribusiness people came offering. He never wanted to sell it to them. A municipal engineer, Abundio, knew came to verify it 3 days later. The spring was real. The right was current. And the water, clean, constant, abundant, made the property worth not the pitiful price Don Ceferino was offering, but something completely different. Gerardo and Aníbal arrived by car from Guadalajara as soon as Consuelo called them. They didn't come alone. They brought Don Ceferino, who had hurried to offer a new figure on the way. They arrived at midday, with the sun vertical over the hacienda's courtyard, and found Consuelo standing on the corridor with Abundio at her side and the deed in her hand. Don Ceferino spoke first. He was a man of soft voice and studied manners, and what he said sounded almost kind. Senora, we understand the sentimental value of the place. The offer we bring is generous, considering the condition of the property. It would be a shame for a misunderstanding to complicate everything. Consuelo looked at him without moving. Gerardo intervened. Mom, we already spoke with the lawyer. The water right can be complicated to defend. You don't have the age or the resources for a lawsuit. Nobody mentioned a lawsuit, said Consuelo quietly. Abundio took a step forward. The right is registered, young man. It is current, and it is in the name of whoever inherited the property. There is no complication whatsoever. Don Ceferino smiled in that way men smile when they are used to having things resolved in their favor. Senora, think it over carefully. A woman alone cannot manage a hacienda. It's better that you sign and leave in peace. The silence that followed was brief. Dignity is not sold here for a roof, sir, said Consuelo. And this hacienda is not alone. Lucero snorted from the corral, as if he had understood. Don Ceferino said nothing. Gerardo looked at his mother with an expression she had not seen in years. Something resembling shame, although he was still far from reaching the bottom of it. The three men looked at each other. Then, without further words, they turned around and walked away down the dirt road. Senora Trini, who had been sweeping the courtyard without appearing to listen, watched them leave and kept on sweeping. The news traveled through the town the way news travels in small towns, slowly, but without missing a thing. When the September rains came down, Consuelo no longer slept on the straw mat. The room off the corridor had a bed, a wood-burning stove, and cotton curtains. The burned wing was still in ruins, but the rest of the hacienda breathed. Lucero put on weight until he recovered something of what he had been. The dark coat regained its shine across the shoulders. The swelling in his hocks went down, and he walked through the corral with a quiet dignity that made one think he had always known someone would come. Abundio helped 3 times a week. Senora Trini brought freshly baked bread on Tuesdays. Herminio had planted a vegetable garden on the sunny side of the corral. Tomatoes, epazote, chili. The calves of a neighbor grazed on the hacienda's plain in exchange for a share of the milk. At dusk, when they returned slowly along the dirt road with their bodies full and their slow steps, Consuelo watched them from the corridor with the jug of coffee in her hands and the patched blanket over her shoulders. Lucero was always nearby. He no longer needed a rope. One afternoon, Abundio asked her without looking, "Are you going to stay then?" Consuelo thought about Ramon, about what he had told her before dying. She thought about the wooden box, about the folded paper, about the spring that sang in the ravine at the back of the boundary. "God willing," she said. Abundio nodded and asked nothing more. Sometimes that's how the most important things arrive, not through the door one was expecting, but through the one we almost didn't dare to push open. Consuelo Medina arrived at the hacienda without knowing it was truly hers. And it was Lucero, an old horse no one wanted who had waited without understanding why, who showed her that staying is also a form of courage. Has an unexpected door ever opened when all the ones you knew had closed? If this story touched something in your heart, leave your comment below. Tell me from what part of Mexico or where you're watching from. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you don't miss any story. And share it with someone who needs to remember that it's not too late to start over. Until the next story. "I am from where I was loved," Consuelo whispered to Lucero that night while she ran her hand along his neck. "And now I know where that is.